Design Symposium. I am super excited about our panelists here. So we have Dr. Terry Irwin from Carnegie Mellon. She joined us. And also we have Dr. Renata Letaio from Cornell University. And we have Dr. Frederick van Amstel from University of Technology, Prana in Brazil. So I'm going to go in depth, like introducing the panels when they wanted to start talking about, to initiate about the topic. So I just wanted to introduce initially our panelists. My name is Farzaneh Eftekhari. I'm Assistant Professor of Packaging Design at UTA. And also I have a research interest in both design thinking and transition design. And I have like a background from GSD Harvard. I was in a risk and resilience program. So I had like initial interest in the topic that further on, I continued in that line of research till now. And I think transition design and design futures become very important topic, specifically at the current time that we are facing a COVID-19 pandemic, and we are observing some of the, a very clear example of how the wicked problem, how the complex problem are, and how we need as a designer to understand about these type of problem, about the, system level thinking. And this type of thinking, I think, is very important that somehow our graduate students, even I think the undergraduate students, they become familiar, and they basically get the sense of how these kind of methodology and thinking will work. So at UTA, recently we become R1 university. So if there are a lot of, huge interest on the new line of research, and specifically in our program, design program, we are very interested to introduce new line of research in our discipline. And because of that, we thought that, transition design and design futures is first of all, is a very important topic. And second, is an interesting line of research that specifically our MFA students, the growing graduate programs that we have at UTA, they can definitely take advantage of that. So by knowing that, I'm very excited to have this, discussion in order to become a little bit familiar with understanding the perspective of the different stakeholders when we are approaching the complex problem. And also we are going to have a little bit of discussion about, some examples of, marginalized communities or indigenous communities. And also we are going to have some discussion about, the wicked problem, the complexity of that. So through this discussion, if you have any question, please write down your question. We are going to open for the Q&A towards the end of when all the panelists, present. Then we have around 15 minutes of Q&A. You can ask your question. And we are going to have, for each panelist, we have 15 minutes of presentation. I'm also going to present towards the end as, the final panelist for our symposium today. So by that, I wanted to, first introduce Dr. Terry Irwin. So Dr. Terry Irwin is a professor and director of Transition Design Institute at CMU. And together with, Dr. Kosov and Dr. Talking-Wise, they actually initiated transition design program at CMU, and there is a PhD in transition design at CMU, a very interesting program. And basically they initiated talking about transition design. Also, Dr. Terry Irwin is the head of a School of Design from the year 2009 to 2019. So by knowing that, I'm very excited to learn and the huge experience that Dr. Irwin has in the topic, and hopefully we can all learn about all these experiences and enjoy her talk. So by that, please join me to welcome Dr. Terry Irwin.
Hi, thank you. So I prepared quite an extensive visual presentation today, and I'm going to try once more to see if I can share it, because I'm not sure what I prepared will make sense without the visuals.
Terry, if you can also in parallel put your slides in the chat box, that in case you cannot open it, maybe I can open and share my screen, and then you can maybe present the option that maybe.
Slides are in Keynote, and it's a several hundred megabyte file.
Oh, I totally understand that. So
unfortunately, I'm afraid I'm going to have to give my talk, I guess, without any of the visuals. And I guess I'll.
Is it possible to share through email, maybe, or some Dropbox or Drive?
It's a several hundred megabyte file because the visuals are so complex. They're not word slides. They're complex visuals. So unfortunately, I can't share it.
I'm very excited because we are very excited to see the slides, and I checked the settings. Sorry that I couldn't be a help here, but if maybe you can maybe present just without the slides at the moment. We are very sorry.
Sorry about this, everyone. It's a very oh, and now my camera has switched on me. Okay, it's a rather complex concept, so I hope it makes sense. Thank you, Farzaneh, and the organizers for inviting me here. As she mentioned, we began transition design at Carnegie Mellon University in 2015. And today I want to talk about the emerging applied approach, and I'll touch on the importance of stakeholder relations in addressing wicked problems. So we often say that transition design brings together two global memes. The first is the idea that entire societies must transition toward more sustainable, equitable, and desirable long-term futures. And second is the realization that these transitions will require intentional systems level change. And you can really see evidence of these memes in the number of transition related projects and initiatives springing up around the world, and the recent rise in what I'll call deep systems thinking and a proliferation of knowledge tools and processes for understanding and addressing complex wicked problems. And I think I may just cut this short, Farzaneh, because without the images, I'm not sure it's going to make sense. Wicked problems are things like crime, income inequality, climate change, terrorism, a loss of biodiversity, lack of access to affordable housing and education, political and social polarization, and global pandemics. And unfortunately, as we know, the list goes on and on. And wicked problems are really systems problems. And my slide shows all of the multiple characteristics of those. But among the most challenging is that every problem is unique and constantly changing. There are multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas and no clear shared problem definition. These problems straddle organizational and disciplinary boundaries, and every wicked problem is connected to other wicked problems. So we've been living through a case study in that for over a year now. There were going to be several slides showing you the concept of how societies change and transition over time, but I think I'll just skip through that. The emerging applied approach is really about trying to frame these very large systems problems within very large problem contexts that actually include the past, the present, and the future. And so first we have to understand how the problem is manifesting in the present and who it affects. We next need to extend the problem frame into the distant past to understand how the problem formed over multiple years or even multiple decades. We then extend the problem frame into the distant future and ask, what is it that we want to transition toward as we resolve the problem? And this is really the step in which stakeholders with conflicting agendas and uneven power relations are able to co-envision long-term futures in which the problem has been resolved, but they're also futures upon which they can agree that are more sustainable, equitable, and hopefully desirable. The next step is to think rigorously and creatively about a decades-long transition from a problematic present to that long-term desired future. And we do this not because we think we can predict the future, but rather because we need to learn to think more rigorously in long time horizons, in contrast to the way our westernized societies think now, which is in terms of fiscal quarters, fashion cycles. So how can we begin to think about both possibilities and probabilities associated with intentional transitions of a collective nature, our organizations, our cities, even entire societies? And we argue that all of these steps that I've just described that create a very large problem frame that includes the past, the present, and the future, all of that is necessary before we can really begin to intervene in a systemic way with systemic solutions, or what we call ecologies of systems interventions, which are really multiple interconnected solutions that are situated at multiple levels of scale in different societal sectors. Because our argument is only through an entire interdependent ecology will you have enough traction to destabilize a stuck, wicked problem and create enough slack in the system so that a directed transition could happen. The final thing I'll say, and then I'm going to end it early, is that wicked problems manifest in place and culture specific ways. And they're always connected to other wicked problems. So we argue that transition design is not a templatized, replicable process. And designers in most disciplines are always so anxious to create a process that you can apply to everything with the same results. And for this reason, we intentionally call it an approach, and we often say, in order to draw that very large problem frame, there are 5 questions that need to be asked and answered. And I just walked you through that. We have to understand how the problem is manifesting in the present, in place, and figure out who is connected to the problem and who is affected by it. Because within any wicked problem, there will be stakeholder groups that are adversely affected by the problem, but there will always be other groups that don't care or might even have a vested interest in not seeing the problem solved because they're benefiting from it in some way. So these uneven power relations and agendas keep it stuck. The second question is, we have to ask, how did multiple issues in the past begin to evolve and constellate to form the wicked problem that we're dealing with today? The next question is, we have to ask very simply, what is it we want to transition toward? If the problem were resolved, what would be possible that's not possible today? The next question is, how can we think rigorously about a decades-long transition from the problematic present to the long-term desired future? And then finally, all of those steps are what we need then to intervene systemically with ecologies of systems interventions. Now, our argument is that each of those questions could be answered by multiple existing tools and processes that are already out there within multiple fields and disciplines. We're developing some of them, but take service design. Service design, design for social innovation. Both of those are processes that could be perfectly suited to designing an ecology of systems interventions, or one of the interventions in an ecology, for instance. The point that we're trying to make is we can't intervene systemically and know where to situate the interventions and when, unless we have a map of this very large, radically large context, much like an acupuncturist would. So asking and answering these questions is a high level, meta level approach. And beneath that are many existing tools and processes that can be used to answer those questions. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. For those of you that would like to know more about transition design as we teach it and use it for research at Carnegie Mellon, the transition design seminar that Gideon Kossoff and I teach every spring is up on the internet as an open source syllabus. And it's at, I believe it's Transition Design Seminar CMU. .net. So there are a lot of readings that you can download. There are teaching materials there. And my own academia.edu page also has a lot of articles and resources on it. So I think I'll wrap it up there, Farzaneh, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. It was very, very, exciting and interesting, presentation. I'm so sorry that become much more, powerful if we have the slides, but, we learned a lot. And I also, Terry, I put the link for the seminar course. I highly recommend to our MFA students to explore the link, because the course is actually is very rich in terms of the material that CMU provided about every and each details of the papers, the podcast, about the videos. So it's very good in terms of each of the topics are explaining details. So thank you very much, Sherry. Thanks for you and all CMU program to share all these details so we can learn in depth about the methodology, about the process. That's a great option for us. I'm going to definitely open for Q&A towards the end of symposium today. But before that, we are going to have the next panelist, Dr. Renata Letaio. I hope that I pronounce your name correctly. If not, please correct me. She is the assistant professor in Department of Design and Environmental Analysis at Cornell University. She is also a graphic designer and social justice focused design researcher with several years of experience in intercultural and collaborative projects with indigenous and marginalized communities. And her research is at the intersection of critical design, participatory design, and communication design and design anthropology. So by that, thank you very much, Dr. Letaio, to join us in this discussion, and please join me to welcome Dr. Letaio.
Thank you so much, Farzaneh. And I say my family name is impossible to pronounce, so I don't I don't care. I don't really care. Only Brazilians and Portuguese can pronounce it properly. So I'm super happy and honored to be here and to share this presentation with Terry and Frederick, and two people that I admire a lot. I really respect you a lot. So let me see if I can share my screen. Tell me if you're.
Yes, we see your screen.
Can you see? My
yes,
screen?
just give us a moment. It seems that you'll go to the full screen. So
so just I'm going back to
yeah, here we can see your screen
okay.
now. Yes.
So my presentation is weaving together Western and non-Western meaning systems. First, I'd like to acknowledge that Cornell University is located on traditional homelands of the Cayuga-Hono, the Cayuga Nation, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we stand and work. So as Farzaneh presented, I'm a graphic designer. I started my professional practice in 2003, and then I moved to become a social design researcher. So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Human-Centered Design at Cornell University. And I also co-chair of the Pluriversal Design Special Interest Group of the Design Research Society. And I'm also a founder and co-chair of the Pivot Virtual Conference. So something important to understand about my background is that I'm Brazilian and Canadian. So I was born in Brazil. As most Brazilians, I'm mixed race. It means that my mother and my father had completely different ethnic backgrounds. So I had contact with different worldviews and epistemologies since I was a child. And that's what makes me a natural bridge person. And I moved to Canada 14 years ago, where I did almost all my academic career, master's, PhD, postdoc. And recently, I moved to the United States to work at Cornell. And as a graphic designer, so I always thought, how can we use graphic design, communication design, to help generate sustainability and social justice? That was my big question from start. And I explored these issues in participatory action research projects, especially collaborating with members of indigenous and marginalized communities. So I used a lot of communication design to create this interaction between local knowledge and academic knowledge. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to present the projects because I would need to have much more time. I just want to share with you what I learned with the projects, because since the beginning, the goal was to address the multiple colossal interconnected crises of our times. And we know about the crisis. We've known it since the 70s. So everyone has been warned about the environmental crisis since the 80s, everyone. So we have many decades of trying to create solutions and responses. And the question is, do you think we are getting closer to solutions? I'm not sure. Just look around. I think that climate change is not coming. Climate change is here. So what can we do? So that's the idea of that I came across transition design a few years ago, and I thought that the idea was very interesting. That our goal is to transition towards a sustainable civilization. So we cannot keep addressing the symptoms of the crisis. And there is also the idea that the Western civilizational model is unsustainable. So if you want to create a sustainable society, we have to understand that the reducing unsustainability is different from creating sustainability. If we are trying to solve the problems of the current system, is different from reconceiving lifestyles, value systems, meaning systems, something that asks for deep cultural change. And of course, societies are changing all the time. We are all the time changing, but you have some civilizational models that transition into another one from time to time. For example, we had the feudal civilization in the Middle Ages that transitioned into the Western modern civilization that we have today. In that time, Europe was completely isolated from the rest of the world. And we had just, imagine how people thought. They thought that Earth was flat, that just how the idea of the world was completely different at that time. And something was very important to create the change was Black Death, was that pandemic that really made people change. I don't know if we need to have something that as drastic to transition into a new civilization, but we hope not. We hope that something that if we want to transition to a sustainable civilization, we have to create it. We have to be purposeful. And then the question is how. That's the question, is how to do it. And I think that the transition design framework is about this, creating this how. And I like so many times Terry frame it as a conversation, that we are really here in a dialogue, really talking about this how. I took this from the page of the transition design seminar, that transition design is concerned with three kinds of systems: the living systems, the environment, the social technical systems, and the wicked problems. And what I have to say is that we also have to think about the meaning system, the way we interpret the world. And when we think about meaning system, we are talking about culture. So if through that system is how we understand our relationship with those three kinds of system. And if we don't understand that the meaning can change, sometimes we end up treating structural features of the modern civilization as wicked problems. And the thing is, how can we relate it to the living systems? There are so many meanings. For example, modern civilization is about the separation between human and nature. So we don't see that we are part of this living system. We don't understand it in our discourse, in the way we think about the world. So many things that the meaning changes a lot how we frame the problems. So that is it. So at the basis of the systems is the matrix of meaning. And in our case, the name we give to this matrix of meaning is modernity. So yes, something else important, and let's hope that maybe COVID-19 is something that we needed to move towards a sustainable civilization, is that modernity was created at some point. And we can define what is culture. Sometimes they are culture, we think there are several cultures, but what is culture? Culture is a system of inherited conceptions, ideas about life, how we develop our knowledge about, how we develop our attitudes towards life. And Clifford Geertz also said that man is an animal suspended in webs of significance he himself has spun. So we are always creating this meaning system, this framework of intelligibility that enables us to make sense of the world. So when we think about cultural change, we are talking about weaving new webs of meaning. The question is, what to do when the problem is within ourselves, in our ways of interpreting reality? Because we cannot build a new system to replace the old one. How do we even recognize what needs to be changed? Because we have no objectivity, as the fish is completely unaware of the water. So we have the fish that he doesn't know what water is about. And I like a lot this metaphor, and I was so happy when I saw that the webpage of the Transition Design Seminar also uses it. You wrote, Marshall McLuhan in his book Water and Peace in the Global Village said, one thing fish know nothing about is water, since they have no anti-environment which would enable them to perceive the element they live in. So that's the thing that the awareness about ourselves we develop in contrast with what we are not, me and not me. So we can only become aware of the features and flaws of our worldview when we contrast with other worldviews and webs of meaning. It doesn't matter, no matter how dominant our worldview is, there are always other ways of interpreting the world. So, where I said that just contrast with other worldviews, contrast with other webs of meaning, is about listening to others, other knowledge systems, other value systems, other ways of interpreting reality. But learning to listen would be a gigantic cultural change by itself, gigantic. Because one feature of modern society, modern civilization, is that it's completely incapable of listening to other webs of meaning, to other points of view. That's something that is really part of the features of modern society. Boaventura de Souza Santos said that the problem is that after 5 centuries of teaching the world, the global north seems to have lost the capacity to learn from the experience of the world. In other words, it looks as if colonialism has disabled the global north from learning in non-colonial terms. So that's it. What is modern civilization? It's a monoculture of meaning. So we have modernity. What really characterizes the beginning of modernity is also the discovery of the other worlds. When Europeans met different worlds, and when they face those worlds that were so different, they conceptualized it as terra nullius, nothingness, absolutely nothingness. And the people there were inferior, they were primitive. But of course, it wasn't nothingness, because those lands started to be exploited. So much of what we see today as just loss of biodiversity, as things that are leading us to an environmental collapse, it started five centuries ago with that exploitation. Just to have an idea, what Stuart Hall said, that the wealth began to flow in. In 1554, America yielded 11% of the Spanish crown's income. In 1590, 50%. 50%. So, but something that at the same time, that is something that is so important, because basically everything that we have around us, our clothes, our phones, have been extracted from other lands. But it's part of modern society to ignore those externalities. Treat this as externalities. How can that be an externality? The people who make our stuff be an externality. That's something. It's invisible because people benefit from that. So you have to create a discourse that make things invisible in the plain sight. And what? Just so you don't see, you just see this water. The water is the meaning, the matrix of meaning of modern society. How? Because it became the human template. Instead of seeing that there are other matrices of meaning, there are other ways of conceiving society, there are other values. The West, the global North had the mission to save the planet, the mission of to teach the periphery how to improve. It had all it's the source of all the solutions. So it has a meaning to find solutions for all the problems. But let's not forget, many problems were created 500 years ago. So you have the fish that is always spreading fishiness. Let's teach people how to be more fish. And just something that what the other meanings, the other knowledge become invisible, because it's almost as what Santos says, there is an abyssal line that makes the knowledge on the other side of the line completely invisible. So it's not that people have different agendas. It's not only about agendas. It's meaning system. It's knowledge system. It's value system. It's a different perspectives. So below this abyssal line, there is like a human treasury of knowledge. And there are so many projects. There are so many things that people are creating now. So many. I think just as a Brazilian, we could talk a lot about the Pontos de Cultura, the cultural hotspots. That was an initiative that we had 20 years ago, and something that Frederick could present to. There are so many things that are happening and are completely invisible to the global north. So then we talk about two concepts, this modern coloniality, and we can talk about pluriversality. When the interactions between the different cultures are redesigned. So it's not fish spreading fishiness. You have different perspectives, different matrices of meaning interacting and talking. So the idea of the pluriversality comes from this concept, the pluriverse, created by the Zapatistas and popularized by Arturo Escobar. It's a world where many worlds fit. That's nice. But there is really a cognitive challenge. Alternative meaning systems tend to seem unintelligible to people raised within modernity because they are based in different assumptions and categories. So we, like modern people, we don't even have terms, words to talk about the different ways of being and knowing. Just think about how we refer to different kinds of community as underserved, developing, disfranchised. This is Western meaning. So if you want to engage with the pluriverse, we need a lot of translation, but not linguistic translation. It's this translation of meanings. And because words won't serve us, just the terms, the categories won't serve us, we need images and stories as tools for knowledge sharing and translation. So I see that creating those intelligible bridges between the different cultures and meaning systems is the ultimate communication design challenge. I see there are three basic steps that I think that are important to create the intelligible bridges. First is to visualize the structures, the structural features of modernity from using the perspective from the South, from the non-Western, from the people who are not fish. Two, making South-North and North-South connections, really exchanging, making different perspectives to exchange. And third is translations between indigenous and academic knowledge. And I really think that if we work on those three steps, we would be able to weave together new understandings. So traditional transition design is a lot about addressing weak problems as a strategy for catalyzing system level change. Ultra important. That is just absolutely, you're doing an amazing work. But I also would like to add that creating intelligible bridges between different meaning systems, change the terms of interactions between Western and non-Western cultures. In the sense, weaving together new understandings, new webs of meaning can be also a super powerful strategy for catalyzing societal transitions. So this is what I have to add to the conversation, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renata. It was an excellent presentation, and we enjoyed it a lot. So I think it's a, starting with Terry, who she kind of open discussion about transition and about different characteristics and the important elements relevant to the methodology, and then you are talking about adding meaning system and how while we are talking about transition design, one element that maybe we can add is the meaning system. We need to include different meaning system in our methodology in order to be able to have like we can say profound change in the culture, so the way that we are thinking about the problem and how different society are thinking about that problem, and then include that. So the cultural point also is an important component that we need to consider that. So thank you very much. It was really a very good presentation. And as I said, we are going to have a Q&A towards the end. But before that, I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Frederick van Amstel. He is Assistant Professor of Service Design and Experience Design at the Industrial Design Academic Department, DADIN, Federal University of Technology, Paraná in Brazil. He published several articles on the topics, on the relevant topics in the international journals such as Design Studies, and his most recent research deals with the contradiction of oppression and the possibilities of designing for liberation. And he developed a new platform called Corais, if I pronounce that correctly, which hosts more than 700 collaborative projects run by social movement, indigenous communities, art collectives, and popular educators associated with the Brazilian digital culture movement. I know that there are several works that he did. This is just brief introduction. By that, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Amstel.
Thank you, Farzaneh, and also Terry and Renata. It's a great pleasure to be with you now. Since I have this trouble on trying to share from my screen, I actually went through the trouble of reinstalling Microsoft Teams and it didn't work. Could you please take the PDF file that I sent you through email, Farzaneh? And then I can provide you instructions when to forward. And while you are doing that, I will provide a little bit of contextualization of what I'm going to present. I'm going to present something about prospective design. Yes, great. And what's the context of this? Well, in 2019, I joined Federal University of Technology, Paraná. And one of the first assignments that they gave me at this university was to join the group of professors who are going to open the first design graduate program in this university. But the national agency says you only will accept proposals that are surely innovative. They can't be similar to other graduate programs that exist in Brazil already. Then we went look around the world. Where are the most innovative graduate design programs? And we came to the transition design group at Carnegie Mellon University. I iconic example for us. And at first, we expected to start a transition design program over here, but we discussed among the professors and came to the conclusion that translation was not very good. Translating transition design to Portuguese didn't work very well, and the word transition, the concept of transition, and even the sustainability discussion was not at the same level as in the US, and it wouldn't make so much sense in our culture to use this concept. And then we decided to develop our own inspired, it is definitely inspired in transition design, but also inspired in other ways of doing, especially those that we inherited from generations of cultural conflict and cultural interchanges here in Brazil. That's what we call prospective design. And I'm going to focus in this short presentation on designing relations. Please forward. In this diagram, I show where we are focused on. So instead of focusing on alternative futures like speculative design does and choosing among the preferable or the probable or the unimaginable, unthinkable, we like to think about the present in detail. And transition design, I would say it's in the midst of that. Usually transition design goes to the future and then backcast to the present, so you can start seeing what can you do now in the present to get to that future. But we have a history of the concept of future in Brazil and other countries that faced coloniality that makes us believe that we should not focus too much in the future forward, please. This is what is called the domestication of the future. It legitimates the colonization of the present with never fulfilling promises. And in our case, we decided we want transition alternative presents to avoid that. Instead of waiting for a future that might be much more sustainable than it currently is, but we don't want to wait for that. We prefer to do something that is less sustainable, but it's doable now, but it's an alternative present that is tangible. We explained this and discussed this concept in a paper that is upcoming. I won't go too much in details in this philosophical part. It's called Existential Time and Historicity Interaction Design. But I will show some practical challenges while we face this forward. The concept of alternative presents can be visually represented as this. So we have a lot of possibilities, each is a dot in this diagram, but some of them are considered unthinkable, impossible, unlikely, probable, and a few of them are considered possible. All of them are lying there around, so we can just look for these alternative presents in the unlikely, in the impossible and unthinkable. And that's what we try to do forward. So we try to expand the possibilities beyond what people could usually think. It's called thinking outside of the box, but not only outside of the box, because after we trace these paths towards possibilities that are unthinkable, we come back again. But instead of coming back to the present, we never left the present in this situation. It's not called a backcasting, it's really deepening into the present forward. While once we come back, then we inaugurate what we call the new possible, because all of these possibilities are already possible, but people didn't think about them. Now they are possible and people know it's possible. So that's what we call the new possible forward. And this new possible is constituted by concrete possibilities, not just speculations about something that might happen, because since we are focused on the present and all of these things are around us, we have many different artifacts and institutions and groups of people that are already there in the present. The thing that is just by relating them in a different way, we start living in this new possible. That's why my focus of this talk is on relations. Forward, please. We could say that we are much more focused on the fourth order of design, according to Richard Buchanan's taxonomy, because we are really focusing on designing relations. But I'm not focusing so much on designing systems, because there are many different collectives, entities, and totalities that are not necessarily systems. We think that, for example, family, religion, nation, they cannot be reduced to a system. But still, the system category is interesting, and we also deal with systems. But we prefer to focus on relations because this is something that is commonality between systems, family, government, and anything else that we want to look at. Please forward. We did a study at the beginning of the last year on how designers were responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we discovered that most of the design responses, they were focused on this first order and second order, respectively, information and experience design. And too little approaches try to focus on interactions and relations, and those were the most affected ones with this COVID-19 pandemic. If it's a system rupture, all the systems, the health systems, and also the collectives like the nation in Brazil, there was a political crisis. We need to focus on relations, but why is this happening? Please forward. Why aren't designers prospective new relations then? Please forward. In this picture, we see how designers look at the world. They see individual entities and they try to design them separately because they only can perceive objective qualities. They cannot look at these relations clearly because they are invisible to them. But once, please forward, we focus on relational qualities, the quality of the relation between those things, then designers start to see something that they can design and contribute in a meaningful way. Forward. Then to prospect new relations, designers, they need to perceive relational qualities. Forward. Let me show you a diagram with some examples of what can be considered relational qualities. On the right side, sustainability, resilience, equity, solidarity, conviviality, mobility. Those are much more difficult to perceive. Where is this? How can you show me what's a good solidarity? What is a bad solidarity? But you can, in design field, show plenty of examples of good and bad usability because these qualities are already very well entrenched in the practices. We need to move to the relational qualities, but then that will go slowly. We need to start experimenting and doing projects to develop this sensibility. Please forward. Relational qualities, they cannot be designed by designers themselves alone. They need to be designed with the related people and with the related things. So we cannot really understand or touch relational qualities if we are working alone in the studio in front of our computers. We need to be in the field with people that will be related with that project. Forward. Now let me show you a few examples of projects that we have been developing here in Brazil. Corai's platform that was already presented. It is a digital infrastructure that enables solidarity economy relations in dozens of culture producers across Brazil. On the back, you see a visualization of the multiple relations between different projects and people that were bridging different projects and connecting them together to make this work. And you see some pictures of a solidarity economy bank that allowed a theater school to work without funding for more than 4 years. And we design a lot of things. It's not like we don't design things, but things are always mediations for the relations. Like, for example, the book Colarizando, which enables all kinds of collectives to organize in that way and take advantage of the accumulated knowledge in this platform. Forward. In this example, which is much more close to what a graduate student can do, one of our students in the undergrad program, she met some coffee worker, women coffee worker in the rural area, and then she connected coffee workers in the urban area, coffee dealers and baristas, and these women started to discuss how sexism affected their work, and they joined forces to organize events. For example, an exhibition of pictures showing like women coffee workers at the women coffee consumption place, so that the consumers could get conscious about the regions of this coffee, because the problem is that these women coffee workers were invisible. They were under a visibility block. Their names didn't appear in the coffee products, And while they did this, they also affected public policy, because one of councilwoman at Curitiba, she just took some suggestions from this group, and they even included the barista coffee women worker in recent law protecting women in workplace. Please forward. And in this other situation, we see our professors here at our department try to figure out how to stimulate more synergy between the different projects we do, outreach projects. And out of this exercise of modeling our relations using LEGO, we came up with this laboratory of design against oppression, and also Prospectina, which is an event that we experimented with our first practical approach for doing perspective design, and imagined how our university will be in 20, 50 years. Please forward. There's another example of how we try to map wicked problems, but we actually focus on what is underneath wicked problems. We call them contradictions. And after mapping the COVID-19 contradictions, we came to this same councilwoman, and we asked her, do you want to use this map to inform your designing a public policy program? And she took it. She reduced the map to what was relevant to her, and she used the map as a way to prioritize what was most important to do in Curitiba. And one thing that she taught us is that the official public campaign was not reaching the people living in the peripheries, because it was really classist and only had white people there. But people who live at the peripheries are usually not white here in Curitiba. Then our students start the grassroots program on designing communication materials with Black people, with brown people, with different language that included more people marginalized by this designing system. Forward, please. So to summarize, prospective design is in itself a relation that discovers new possible relations in alternative presence here and now. So thank you very much, and I'm very curious to discuss with you these topics.
Thanks very much. It was a great, combination of different topics, and I mean, with Terry, and then what Renata present and what you present, and I think it's an interesting perspective about relational quality and how you need to go. Maybe I can say like a vertical and then horizontal in terms of time, or in the present you go in depth and understanding the relation and how you can understand in details the wicked problem, but in the present time. So maybe further on we can have like discussion, can we consider that the first milestone of a bigger perspective that we have for the transition design when we envisioning future, but we are designing the milestone, and in each milestone, which maybe the first step is going very in depth and understanding the problem in like in a very details. So can we have somehow this combination, or we can have this discussion that how we can is there possibility that we combine this relational quality and what you presented with the transition design, which is envisioning the future, or maybe it's relevant to the different countries that are connecting to what Renata says. So different cultures, maybe depends on a situation, depends on a community. The community, we can say that the region that we are studying, maybe we need an immediate planning, or we need a future planning. So we can have like this discussion in our Q&A section. I am the final panelist, and I'm also going to talk about wicked problems. So just I give you a moment that I share my screen. Okay. I think if I wanted to create the first, a little bit connection with discussion that we have today. I think we are, we had like different perspective about, integrating culture and meaning into the transition design methodology. And while, Terry explained about, how this transition design initiated at CMU and why it's become an important topic. And then, talking about the topic that we have from Fred, who emphasized on the quality relationship. I wanted maybe emphasize a little bit on wicked problem in my side to explain like why like the different the root difference of the problems that we are looking at, and that caused this this conversation about future design, about transition design. And all of this I can say very similar to what Renata and Fred suggested. I'm also very affected, or I deeply interested in the topic when I learn about the transition design program at CMU. So as a designer, we may started with learning about product design or any kind of design, the graphic design, any type of design that you are doing. So you are concentrating maybe on the object or on the physicality of the product, service, or any artifacts that you are designing. And then we move towards service design or design thinking. That's become like an important topic of considering people, understanding people at the deep level. And then it seems that the type of problems that we are facing in each we can say in each stage, it's become different. And it seems that the problems become like maybe the problem, the wicked problem exists before, but maybe we are now much more affected or become aware of existence of such complex problem. And maybe there is a huge need for new methodology that capable us as a designer to be able, not as a designer, but as a people who can collaborate with other disciplines to basically understand the problem. First of all, I wanted to emphasize on the problem. The problem is this in a deeper level. So basically, the type of problems that we are facing today, the scale is different. So they are like in the maybe in a community, in a even in a region-based kind of problem, because we need to see the problems in a larger in a scale and be able to first of all synthesize and understand the problem. And then the root causes of the problem, maybe in the previous discussion, sometimes as a designer we would just think about a linear process that within like a formula or a structure, if you put the problem inside that formula, you can be get the answers. But the problems such as healthcare, education, forced migration or climate change, and now that we face to pandemic or marginalized communities, so and the problems that these communities have. So these type of problems, they have like root causes in many different we can say not disciplines, but also in different levels. So there are system level problems. They are highly interconnected, and these type of problems we cannot approach that with a simple like solution and even say that we can answer that by creating a solution for that. So we, I think in design discipline, we may, used to have like looking at, or not just in the design, in kind of, the educational side, the type of education that we have, we used to have like sitting inside our discipline in a silos environment, to just, you know, thinking about problem from that discipline perspective, and sometimes ignoring the other, you know, parts, other factors that affect that problem. So we decontextualize the problem, and we, you know, in our silos, we are just thinking about as one aspect of the problem. But in transition design, so the methodology, we, you know, as you know, those who are in Pioneer, like Terry, they kind of, you know, introduce us a new methodology that we are able to map the problem and looking at the problem from very different perspective and seeing the dynamic, the network, the relationship. And by that, we can have like these discussions, such, you know, Renata, you know, add towards that. So even the culture is very important, you know, and then we need to, you know, bringing new and new different layers to that methodology. So basically what's changed is from the tradition to, you know, transition design, problem solving, or those who are working on future design or meta design, they kind of, you know, invite us to looking at a problem from very different perspective and try to, you know, map this dynamic and basically identify the place for the intervention in that problem. Also, you know, there was another term that was, you know, defined as, you know, how the wicked problem act, and the action is like a system. So there are, like, when we are thinking about a wicked problem, they have self-organized features. So what we mean by self-organized feature, that means that within the because the wicked problem actually usually created like through the time. So it's there is an root in the past. So there are some events, there are some action, decision, policies, you know, cultures that happen and impacts on that problem, and then create the current situation. And then, you know, this will continue in the future. So it's kind of, you know, system problems that there are specific relation and networks that happen inside that system of the system problem. And what we mean by self-organizing, if there is any, so we can think about the external and then internal of that problem. So any kind of disruption or any kind of, you know, we can like have the example of COVID-19. So when the pandemic happened, you know, there is created disruption, okay, in many of the systems that used to, you know, work within itself. But you know, if there was any kind of disruption in a system, it's kind of creates another, the system, the problem, the wicked problem is learn to kind of observe that problem and self-organize. So basically it's kind of, you know, create a new kind of relation inside, which is not, you know, we can say sometimes it's create a you know, next stage of the problem as well. So in the when we are, you know, talking about wicked problem, we need to think about that you know, in system thinking, and the way that we can approach this type of problem is a little bit different with what, you know, traditionally designers used to basically work on this problem. So we usually, you know, having this disconnection of and then interconnectedness of the you know, factors in the problem. So we used to have like looking at the specific problems and then approach to that, just giving a solution for that. But in this type of, in wicked problem, there are a lot of interconnectedness that we need to study that, and we need to spend good amount of time to understand this interconnectedness between the factors that basically create that wicked problem. And the way that we are approaching, as we discussed, is not a linear process, it's a circular process. So we cannot quickly, you know, coming to the solution, but you know, there are a lot of back and forth of, you know, going like what I think Dr. Amstel basically suggested about, you know, envisioning future and then having the backcasting. So looking at some of the possibilities in the future, and then, you know, having like this back and forth between the strategy or the plan that we have is very important in our approach to the problem. We also talk about, you know, thinking about wicked problem in silos is not, you know, it cannot create basically a better situation for us, because there are a lot of, as we said, there are a lot of interconnectedness, and this connectedness is creating new network emergence, and we need to study that, we need to aware of that, and we need to have a transdisciplinary approach in order to be able to basically plan for making the situation better. So usually we are not talking about, you know, this creating the like answering the solution. Sometimes we are basically planning to make the situation better. And then parts and wholeness, again, you know, looking at one part of the problem versus, you know, having the holistic vision in order to be able to looking at the wicked problem. Analysis versus synthesis. So we need to have the capability for the synthesis process in order to basically understand the problem and plan for that. Isolation and relationship, again, is very you know, it's connected to what we say in the interconnectedness and then emergence, and then understanding this relationship and studying about that in order to basically, these are all at the problem stage, problem definition stage. So you can imagine that how much we spend on understanding the problem in a linear process or in the traditional process, versus in transition design, that if we need to understand all of this, that means we are spending a considerable amount of time to synthesize, to understand the relationship, to basically be able to understanding the problem in deep level. And then when basically we capture that deep understanding of the problem, we then be able to thinking about a leverage point for intervention in the system. So when you have a good understanding of all the factors about the problem, you are in a better point to say, okay, these could be some leverage points in a system, and then we can move towards, you know, designing the milestone and then having the envision of the future. But in parallel with like going very in depth of, you know, capturing all the, you know, environmental, political, social, all these, you know, important key parts that kind of create that that may impact on creating that wicked problem. When we understand that and we are mapping that, the other you know, part of the methodology that I think transition design introduced is that you can think about, you know, the past, the now, and future. So we are also looking at you know, understanding these different branches that we mapped as our wicked problem map. Also thinking about what's happened in the past, what are the events, you know, what are the political, social, and cultural, economic events that may impact on the problem in the past that created the current situation, and then be able to basically plan for the future. So these are the two aspects that can help us basically planning for the wicked problem. And besides that, as Dr. Irwin suggests, she basically, they introduce in the methodology, the other important aspect is, you know, you need to think about in a longer term. So when we are talking about future, it means that maybe in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, that you need to basically takes time to bring that fundamental change in the society. So I just wanted to basically introduce this, wicked problem as an important, aspect of the transition design that creates this whole discussion, because some of our MFA students, they are, the transition design is a new topic, so future design. So I wanted to make sure that our students also understood that why we have this discussion and why this methodology become important and why they should be care about, future thinking as an important, research agenda for maybe the future kind of studies. So I will stop sharing the screen now, and I wanted to open for discussion. I will wait for our for now. I just wanted to that we have a live stream of the event, so some of our audiences are just watching us through YouTube, but we have some participants in the meeting. So I wanted to open for discussion if you have any question about our panelists, and then we can basically continue from that stage. Do we have any question? Yes, Amanda, please.
Hello. As I was listening to you all talk, I keep thinking, because I really like this topic a lot. I'm not a designer. I'm actually an art educator. But I think about these things a lot. And I think about them a lot in terms of the overarching system of like capitalism and how the US likes to export or has been exporting capitalism for a really long time. And I think about the people who kind of have the power and wealth in terms of the system, and how do we like get these folks because they're living a very good life, right? So why would they want to give that up in terms of their control and their power to change these systems, right? To change the ways in which they maybe benefit from the system. And they have such a, I don't know, I feel like they have such a strong hold on many governments. And they just have so much power and wealth that they could keep it the way they want it. Right. So I just wonder how this, I mean, you all sort of touched on this, I feel, but I'm just wondering if you all have any ideas, like how does this sort of transition happen? That's a big question. I'm sorry. It's just something that rattles around in my brain constantly. And I'm like, how do we get to this point where we can even start this, right?
I can share a quick attempt. So once I returned from my PhD to Brazil in 2015, it was right in the middle of a major political crisis, and I joined the left government of Dilma Rousseff, and we started to create a participatory design national policy where all public policy will be participatorily designed. It was really beautiful. However, then we got this coup d'etat, which had some intervention of FBI agents from the US in Brazil. And from that point on, it went down the rail the possibilities of participation in our government. And I mean, we are currently in a pretty bad situation in terms of democracy level. But instead of focusing on re-electing someone from the left, we are really focused on what can we do now? Because the election is just only next year, and we can start prospecting new possibles right now in the small level if you have enough in different places. And we also are well connected to share our experiences. We build up a bottom-up movement that might be supported by a new president, which has a more leftist orientation, but it might also not be, and then we still can resist the next right-wing president. At least I believe so, because if we still survived Bolsonaro's, we can deal with anyone. Can even come President Trump to Brazil, we'll handle it.
Yes, I totally feel you. Just I understand, but something that I'd like to mention And I'm not going to minimize like poverty and like starvation, those things. But sometimes we think that people really benefit from the system. And yes, people like the 1% really benefit from the system. But most people who live in North America are not really benefiting from the system either. So that's something that is that's something that we have to understand. And many times the people just that I connect in Brazil, that are really doing this movement, even with all the difficulties, just the fact that you are like a struggle, you really have meaning in your life. So that's something that this crisis of meaning that we see a lot here is something that sometimes we don't see there. So I don't like to really imagine that, oh my God, everybody in North America is benefiting. Yes, 1% is really benefiting. Yes, but most people aren't that much. That's something that I always want to remember.
Terry, do you want to add something?
Your mic
I
is
think
off,
you're
Terry.
in mute. Sorry, you're in mute.
Sorry, it's a little noisy over here at the minute. Yeah, I would say it's a natural tendency to want to ask these big global questions, which are always around a topic of, yeah, some of us want to change, but others of us don't. And I don't think it's possible to address a big amorphous question such as, what about the people that are benefiting from capitalism and how do we get them to change? We all have been asking those questions for decades. And I think one of the reasons we came up with transition design was we realized these large socio-technical systems, you can't address them in their entirety. You can't even address a problem like the political and social polarization that is breaking this country in two right now. That's too big a problem. The system is too big to address. So we focus on wicked problems because we think they're windows into the larger systems that need to transition. And I think they're fractal in nature. So you might focus on transitioning a neighborhood, and you might look at how a large wicked problem such as poverty or crime is manifesting in my little neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And in addressing that problem, in trying to bite off a bite-sized chunk of it, you're actually entering into the larger system of the city. And so we have always argued that a strategy for collective transitions is to address wicked problems as they are manifesting in a particular place at a particular time in a particular cultural way. And so what we learn from chaos and complexity theory is that within any kind of open complex system, multiple actions that are happening almost under the radar that seem imperceptible, if they are consistently happening over a period of time, can produce what's called a phase transition. It's like when water freezes. It seems to happen suddenly, but it's actually an emergent property of a system within which tiny actions have been happening over time. So in a way, when we're working toward transition design, we are trying to work toward a phase transition. And the one that always springs to mind within my lifetime was when the Berlin Wall fell. It seemingly came out of nowhere, but it was actually the result of small political community-based actions that had been accruing over time. So I think understanding these systems dynamics, while we still absolutely ask the big questions, but we have to look strategically at what are the smaller place-based wicked problems we can all begin working on simultaneously and then connect them to try and produce a phase transition that is a intentional transition. Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, thank you. It helps me. Well, you know, I think about that too. I don't know if any of you read the book *Sapiens*. Yuval Harari, I think, the author. He talks about humans in terms of, like, you know, basically the advent of agriculture about 12,000 years ago is really when we started changing as a society, or a global society, right? Because prior to that, you know, we moved around the land freely, we hunted and gathered our resources, and it was, you know, basically at that point that really changed everything. And then as you all were talking about with colonization, that just sort of sped things up, I think, in a strange way, or not, I guess not strange way, but it just did. So, you know, I think
don't forget Black Death. Black Death. That was something super important to make the feudal civilization to change into something else.
Well, in the French Revolution too, right? Like, people were fed up with the feudal system and were like, we want change. But it's not necessarily always that we get a better, more positive change out of those, you know. So it's like, I always think about this in terms of, it seems to me that it always comes back to like human behavior and really understanding human behavior, and like what Renata was talking about with like these sort of mindset or consciousness changes, right? And it's hard for me. Maybe I'm a little cynical, but I'm like, how are we going to get there? But anyway, I just love y'all's talk. It's really good to hear you all.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thanks very much for the panelists who answered who basically follow up for the question. Do we have any other questions? So it seems that our audiences do not have question. I maybe start asking one question. So I am basically something that Fred presented, and then what we have in transition design. So I wanted to basically go a little bit more in depth that why I think you mentioned some aspect of that in your presentation, that why the current, what you are emphasizing on the present time in order to basically go in depth for the relational quality. So I wanted to see if that means for your perspective, envisioning the future or looking at the future is I don't want to say like irrelevant, but some like you wanted to emphasize on the present and basically seeing more value on that. So I wanted to see how can you go a little bit in depth and explain one more time why is that case, and then how you may connect that to transition design as well.
All right, nice. Well, I can go very philosophical on that, but I will not try to do that. All right. So the present is all we have, right? And the past is just a present. We are keeping it right now still with us. And the future is the present we think that might be the same present in the future. So all we have is, in fact, the present, because we can only speculate about the future, or we can also count histories about the past in the present, because that's where the action is, all right? We can focus on this possibility in terms of something that will arrive, so a future that is not yet a present, but maybe it will become, and that's what speculative design does. And also transition design will go there and then comes back to nearest futures and even to alternative presents. But instead of doing all this this time of going over there, traveling to the future, we focus pretty much on this present, because then we start walking with the world quicker and changing situations, because we don't believe us designers change stuff. We believe that society is changing and we want to be part of it, and we want to be conscious on being part, so we can make a mindful contribution to the change that's already happening. And handling for example, what is possible, what's not possible, is perhaps one of the contributions, showing that something that people think it's a taboo can be a totem, can be something that will inspire them to work towards changing the current situation. And that's also passed through the meaning systems that Renata told us, because that's all about what is happening in the present. How do we make sense of our reality?
Okay. Can I, Terry, ask you that then how you are basically analyzing what Fred said? So how we can then, you know, think like if this is the case, if we can concentrate on the situation that we have now and in the present, and that may be like immediate response from our designer, then how, can you explain what is the power of the transition design then? So why then we think that transition design could be like another way, or maybe another strategy that help in the process of understanding the wicked problem first, and then basically providing some intervention in the system?
Well, yeah, I can contrast, I think, our views on using the future as a key step versus starting in the present. Part of our rationale for saying that it's important for stakeholders to co-create long-term visions of what they want to transition toward is, in our experience, multiple stakeholder groups that are connected to and affected by a problem have conflicting agendas, and they often can't even agree on what the problem is, let alone how to go about solving it. So part of what keeps the problem stuck is they're all often arguing for what they think is the best single solution. We often call it a silver bullet solution. This hope runs really deep in all of us, that if we just had enough money, or if we could think hard enough, we'd come up with the one solution to this wicked problem. And of course, there is none. You cannot solve a wicked problem with a single solution. So they spend all of this time bickering over it. It's made more complex by the complex values and animosity between these groups often. What we have found is that when you say to groups of stakeholders like this, for now, don't worry about how we're going to solve the problem. What we want you to do is simply think about what the long-term future would be like if the problem were solved. What is it that your stakeholder group wants for the future? If the problem were resolved, what would be possible in your lives that isn't possible now? So we have each stakeholder group do that visioning exercise among themselves, and then we put their visions up on the wall. And often one very important thing comes out of that. They all of a sudden see that they have more in common with each other about what they want for the future than they thought that they did. And I often use the example of my neighborhood. We have Trump supporters that are our neighbors. We don't support Trump. So you can imagine the differences. But if we did a visioning exercise and we asked, what do we want for our neighborhood in 50 years? Our visions would be more similar than they would be different. So we think what the futuring exercise does is two important things. It pulls us up and out of our habitual way of thinking, and our habitual way of thinking created the current unsustainable paradigms we're embedded in right now. So we sort of intentionally leave that behind. And it also shows stakeholders that they can agree on some things, and it begins to dial down the animosity and create bridges among them. And they're more apt to be able to say, okay, well, maybe we don't agree on how to get there, but it looks like we all want to go in the same general direction. So we actually use the futuring as a way to transcend our unsustainable socioeconomic political paradigms. And we also use it as a way to build bridges between stakeholder groups.
Thank you very much. The reason I'm asking this, because that might be like an important question for some of our students that they wanted to put like this as an agenda. So why I concentrate on now and what I can do, and why the future thinking, and why the transition design, and what kind of problem can be addressed. So it's good that, you know, we have this conversation, you know, each of these has like its own reason and maybe the advantage and disadvantage. So it's very good that, you know, we have this discussion. So Renata, do you have something to add about this discussion?
Yes, I think that there is value in each one of the perspectives. I totally understand that this sometimes in the context when you are working with people who are really in the like more marginalized end, it's very difficult to work with futures. So then it's something that and you have like a huge literature because why, like one of the manifestations of power is this problem with the capacity to aspire, to engage with even the imagination, which is part. So when you bring the discussions about future, you block, or the things that they mention, things that they were supposed to aspire. So we have to bring back to the present. We have to bring it back to the present, to the meaning, to the feelings, to the experience of what they already have, to the really what they have around. And then from that, we give together a small steps based on the present. And after giving a small steps, then you have the capacity to think about the future. So I don't think that focusing on the present, focusing on the future is something that is like either one or other. In some situations, you have to work with the present, because talking about the future don't work. But then you have to also work with the future when people already have this capacity to aspire a little bit more developed, because then you can plan more in long term. So I think that's the two approaches are complementary.
And I think maybe in follow-up your discussion, maybe, you know, nurturing this type of thinking early on of the education, I think is something important, because then students can step by step, you know, being capable of looking like in the present, also be capable of having the, you know, looking at a problem like in the past, present, and future. So even just practicing that and just being able to you know, nurturing this type of, you know, capability and skills would be something important, because then they always can see the problem in the present, but they are also capable of somehow, you know, at least try that and see, you know, what is the, you know, because when you are putting the problem in a longer term and also in the like a future format, it just, you know, push you towards looking at the problem in like a system level. It pushes you to think about different stakeholders. It pushes you to put a lot of emphasis on understanding problem in deeper level. So just I think this skill of thinking also is very important in itself as a skill, I think, what I wanted to say. Yeah. So I think we are reaching to the final minutes of the symposium today. Thanks very much for all our great panelists, and also the great you know, audiences for the meeting today, and those who are basically watching us online. So if I just wanted to make sure that if we don't have any further question from the audiences. Okay, then thank you very much for the time. And we really enjoyed about the discussion today. We learned about, and hopefully we can have this continuous, you know, collaboration and discussion in the further events at UTA.
Thank you very much for putting this together, Dr. Eftekhari.
Thank you.
Sure, definitely.
Bye.
Terry, thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much,
you.
Freddie, and thank you very much, Renata. Thank you.